The need for control is quite common in that we all feel out of control or uncertain at various times in our lives. Particularly during adolescence, during the 20s, during any time of change, or during an emotionally troubling time in your life. Really, this sense of uncertainty can come at any point, given any situation, and the need for control or the desire for that control or certainty becomes prominent within each of us at different times in our lives. If you can only support creators who provide value and make you think, please consider contributing to my Patreon page the next time you watch one of my videos. Hello everybody and welcome. Today I want to talk about understanding Ted Bundy and what kinds of lessons we can learn from him and his history. I've actually tried to record this video a couple of times, and it's been shockingly difficult to actually make the kind of video that I want to make here, partially due to malfunctions of my phone, which I record on, and partly due to the breadth of information that I kind of want to discuss in this video. That being said, some of the concepts in this video might be challenging for some of you guys. I know that it is not necessarily a fun topic to dig into. Delving into the psyche of a serial killer is not the easiest or most pleasant thing in the world. And while we're not going to be really going into any extreme details or figuring out the specifics of murders and whatnot, I do think that this kind of examination of an extreme consciousness is a valuable thing for us to kind of explore a little bit and see how it relates to our own life. So I recommend that you start with a deep breath. Try to clear your system of any worries or fears. Try to become kind of an open vessel, non-judgmental. I'm not asking you to accept anything that I say as hard facts or anything, but I do want you to be able to listen without bias so that you can gauge the information for yourself from a fresh perspective. I think that's really important, and it's really going to help anybody who watches this video and can benefit from the kind of information I share here to actually start to make changes and look internally and figure out some things about themselves as well. So I think this time around I'm going to record the video in two parts. More than likely I will post them in the same video though, so it probably won't make much difference to you. But I'm going to start off kind of delving into the psyche of Ted Bundy and what I believe happened there, and then I'll transition over to the lessons that we could potentially learn from him and from his life and through the process of his trial and whatnot. In particular, the end result, the reactions of people outside, the prison when he was electrocuted, and the emotions that still run in some of those affected by his activities. So, without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. So, Ted Bundy, despite what a lot of people are probably going to say, is not that complicated. And the reason that I say this is I believe pretty much every activity that anybody does can be whittled down to their emotional state at the time. And the only reason that Ted Bundy ended up the way that he did was because he was focused in a negative state of mind for a really long period of time, which led to a constant need for release, a regular need for release, which is why he killed monthly for a really long time, and also why at the end of his time and the second time he escaped from prison, it's also why he caused such carnage in that particular escape. So ultimately, it all whittles down to the emotional state. It all whittles down to where his attention was focused, which was on the negative, and how that was expressed in his life. Now, the primary emotions that I believe Ted Bundy was feeling are probably anger, disgust, and self-loathing. Anger, my guess, would have started for him sometime in his adolescence, particularly in high school. I know that he talked about how he had a pornography addiction, and a couple people described him as an outsider, couldn't quite fit in, which meant that he probably dealt with rejection. I mean, honestly, who doesn't in high school? Rejection is kind of like a part of the growing process. It's a part of relationships and interacting with the opposite sex. So my guess is he internalized that particular pain of rejection, and the self-loathing part didn't help. You know, he already viewed himself as lesser, as worthless, as, you know, the scum of the earth. Where he got this perspective, we can't be entirely sure. But it's actually fairly common. I know a lot of people who have this kind of self-belief that they're worthless, useless, and a complete waste of space. So it's not shocking that somebody would feel this way, particularly in high school. The unfortunate side is that he continued to feel this way far beyond high school. You know, he didn't actually start processing into more positive emotions. He just maintained a negative focus, which probably indicates that his parents were not the best at navigating their own emotional fields. And then the fact that Ted Bundy was a psychopath and a narcissist indicates some kind of trauma in his past as well. So I would assume that something happened that caused him to kind of bunker down and hide within himself and kind of cut himself off from his emotions and the feelings of other people. So, you know, it's hard to say for sure what exactly caused these things, but when it comes down to it, it's completely relatable. You know, anger, we all want to know what that feels like. Self-loathing is very, very common in high school. And then disgust, that is actually just kind of an extrapolation on the self-loathing, but extended to other people as well. This is kind of where the blame game comes in. You know, you blame yourself, but after a while you can no longer shoulder that burden, so you pass the blame on to somebody else because it feels better. You know, it provides relief to pass the blame on to somebody else. In my mind, blame can never be fully removed from the self, though, including when you blame somebody else, which means that if you are in a state of blame, you're kind of in between two very similar emotional states, stuck, kind of shifting between blame of the other and blame of the self. And I'm not entirely sure you can escape that when you still have blame as your reason for whatever is going on, you know, for your actions or for your activities or for your particular life circumstances. So in Ted Bundy's case, he probably had a very strong sense of the blame game going on in his head, and he was probably beating himself regularly internally, you know, mentally, beating himself up, telling himself that he was worthless, he was useless, and all these other things, similar concepts to what many people deal with on a regular basis. If you think about it, Ted Bundy is fairly normal in the emotions that he's feeling. Everybody is going to feel these emotions. The only difference is when it comes to the bell curve of behavior, he fell on the extreme side, which meant that he kind of became obsessive in his emotions and followed them down a negative path. Similarly, if you look at, say, like Buddha or Jesus, they went the other way. They became obsessive about the positive emotions, which led them toward a path of kind of enlightenment or good or, you know, evolution, things like this. I cannot say for sure whether either of these paths are innately good or bad. I do know, though, that the positive emotion one, you know, doesn't really cause harm to other people as far as I can tell. The only time that harm is caused is when you get stuck in a negative emotion, and when some aspect of yourself takes over. So, specifically, what was it that Ted was looking for? You know, like what kinds of things was he trying to get out of life, and what aspects of himself was he denying and trying to escape from? And this is a really important question. I've talked a little bit about denied aspects before. This is a concept that was actually introduced to me by Teal Swan. She's a teacher that I don't fully resonate with, but she has some really good information. And this is one aspect of her teaching that I really agree with, where if you have a negative emotion, if you have a negative reaction, it usually means that you're rejecting something within yourself. And from my perspective, Ted Bundy probably had at least two major aspects of himself that he was rejecting. The first one was his desire, and this includes like sexual desire, it includes desire for life, you know, like his dreams, his goals, things like that. I think he viewed ambition and pursuit of passion and pleasure and things like that as bad for whatever reason. Which is part of the reason why he actually became so obsessive about pursuing his goals and, you know, fulfilling his desires and things like that to the degree that he did. You know, he became truly obsessive. It consumed him. And the only reason it consumed him is because he tried to reject that aspect of himself. The other aspect of himself that he rejected, from my perspective, is his survival instinct, his protective instinct that bit inside of him that said, hey, you really need to take care of yourself and things like this. Oftentimes this protective instinct, this survival mechanism, we see the negative side, which is abuse and harm and violence. And a lot of people see the negative side and they kind of withdraw. It's a very natural response. I think a lot of people, when they view potential evil within themselves, are going to withdraw. And it's unfortunate because when you withdraw, the aspect becomes separate from you. It becomes kind of like its own entity. But because you cannot fully disconnect from it, it just gets louder and louder and bigger and stronger, and because this aspect is trying to teach you something, and if you aren't willing to listen, it will shout at you. And that's kind of what happened with Ted, I think, is he pushed away this aspect of himself over and over and over and over again, and it just got stronger and louder and more powerful because he wasn't learning the lesson that his body was trying to teach him, and he just kept pushing it away further and further, which meant it had to come up with new manners in which to express itself, which in his case got so extreme that the only way that that aspect of himself could be expressed was through violence, through abuse, and through killing. Similarly, his disgust and self-loathing found relief in killing as well. And that's kind of where this final aspect that I was going to talk about, which is the things that he wanted out of life, you know, the things he pursued. And the three things that he really seemed to need in his life were attention, he needed worth, and he needed control. All these things are very common desires. Attention indicates, though, that he was neglected at some point in his life, or felt neglected at the very least. I'm not commenting at all on his parentage. As I've discussed earlier, any kind of trauma can be caused by just about anything. You know, somebody can lose a parent and not feel sad, but somebody else can lose a pet and feel absolutely traumatized by it. So, you know, trauma is so unique and so individual that we can't know exactly what happened. But more than likely, he felt neglected at some point and was constantly trying to get attention. And my guess is he was looking for kind of a parental figure. This is why a lot of his behavior came across as kind of braggy and prideful and like, hey, give me praise kind of thing. That's a very parent-oriented perspective. So he probably felt neglected by his parents, and that was a shaping feature of his future development. That does not mean anything about his parents. That is all about Ted. So don't mistranslate. He just felt neglected and in need of a parental figure, which unfortunately wasn't easy for him to get, especially as he got older. Now, as for the sense of worth and value, he seemed to have a constant desire to improve his living situation. And the way he did this was kind of by altering himself to match his future, or to match the future he desired. One of the people who knew him described how he bought the same car that the guy had, pursued the same degree in law that the guy had, and went after kind of wealthy family daughters to date them and prove himself worthy of their attention and whatnot. And he met some challenges along the way. I mean, he wasn't able to get into a really good law school, and obviously he wasn't finding much in the way of financial success. So at every turn, as he tried to prove himself capable and worthy of this life that he wanted, he found that he wasn't matching the desire, and that probably came as a blow to him. That's something that I can relate to very well. Over the years, I've definitely decreased my sense of needing to prove myself, which I think is good. But when I was young, I used to think I needed a big white house with pillars and a red carpet entrance. And, living in a semi-truck really helped me whittle down what I actually need. And now here I am teaching people that all you really need is freedom and life to be happy. And I'm not entirely sure you need freedom. So obviously he didn't have the same evolution process that I did. So his desire for worth and to prove himself valuable and to prove himself capable and functional and self-sustaining turned out to be kind of a false pursuit, which it does for most people at some point in their lives. And he also found that he couldn't actually live up to the desire that he held, which he probably could have had he eased the pressure. But that kind of leads to the third aspect that he really wanted, which was a sense of control. And once again, this is an extremely common desire for a lot of people. The need for control is quite common in that we all feel out of control or uncertain at various times in our lives. Particularly during adolescence, during the 20s, during any time of change, or during an emotionally troubling time in your life. Really, this sense of uncertainty can come at any point, given any situation, and the need for control or the desire for that control or certainty becomes prominent within each of us at different times in our lives. There are some people, though, who the need for control never really fades. And my guess is these people are very ruled by fear, which indicates that Ted probably was led by fear as well. But at least part of the reason why this control aspect may have contributed to his development and to the process of his creation was because society has this expectation, particularly about men, that they will be in constant control, that they will have their life figured out, and that they will have the answers, and that it's not okay if they don't have it figured out and they don't have the answers. I think we all, to a certain degree, suffer from this issue, but it's definitely more pressure for men. Women still have a particular amount of leniency in this area. Don't get me wrong, that's not to say that men or women don't suffer, it's just they suffer in different ways. Men suffer from expectations and whatnot that are impossible to meet. A constant even keel is not possible for anybody, and yet the societal expectation is that men are going to be constantly in control and constantly calm and easygoing and successful and whatnot. So I can understand why a lot of men would suffer from this particular thing. For Ted, my guess is there was some particular aspect of his life where he felt out of control. Combine that with the societal expectation that he would have it all figured out, And it's no wonder that this became a consuming need, essentially a consuming driver. He needed control, and the more he sought control, the more out of control he felt, and it became kind of a spiraling thing where eventually the only way he could find control was through something drastic. I think pretty much any crime actually comes down to a sense of control, because the only reason that you would, say, steal from a store, other than survival, which is control over your survival, is because some aspect of your life is feeling uncertain or uncontrollable, and thievery gives you something tangible to look at and be like, see, I did this. It's very obvious, you know, you have it in your hand, you accomplish something. And while it's not necessarily legal, you still, for a moment, got that sense of control and felt at ease, if only for a second. Killing would be a fantastic example of somebody who is looking for control, because in the life of the person who you kill, you are absolutely in control. You know, you get to decide whether they live or die, and there is no greater control mechanism out there, really. Life and death is probably the most important aspect of everything. Obviously, trauma doesn't help in this regard, but if somebody is dependent on you for their life, and you get to decide whether they live or die, you are absolutely vital to them. You are absolutely the focus of all their attention, and you get to choose. I mean, they have no control. You have all the control. So it's understandable why some people turn to killing. It's unfortunate, obviously. I think killing is a prime example of a mental illness. I'd say everybody who kills in any regard is probably mentally ill and in need of severe therapy. In particular, those who become serial killers, but all killers would really fall into this category. Killing is really not natural, and while it may be necessary at times for survival, and this is where self-defense and stuff comes in, usually we have to dehumanize in order to kill somebody without feeling remorse, regret, or guilt. And if somebody is killing for pleasure or for fun, which would be a serial killer, for example, that means that there's something so severe going on in their head that that's the only way they can find relief. And it's really stupid if you think about it logically, because you're destroying your potential help. You're destroying somebody that you're connected to, and you're destroying the potential for them to aid you in your development and growth as well, which is one of the most important aspects of life and something that we are all drawn towards, development and growth. So it's not natural to kill, in my eyes. So that's essentially what I believe created Ted Bundy. And I know that it's a lot of information, but if you kind of dig into each of these individual aspects a little bit, you might kind of see where I'm coming from with this. I think I did a decent job of explaining it, but you might actually have to go watch like some of my other YouTube videos to get a better sense of where I'm coming from with these concepts. There's no doubt that Ted Bundy was monstrous, but I definitely don't agree that he was innately evil. And I think a big part of what made him was just a culmination of a whole bunch of little things that went wrong for him, and a focus on the negative, which led him down a bad path. And he wasn't able to see the good anymore. He wasn't able to view himself as worthy. He wasn't able to view other people as worthy either. I mean, to a certain degree, I think he probably viewed other people as better than him, but he still wasn't quite capable of connecting those emotional states. And given that he's described as a psychopath and a narcissist, more than likely he didn't feel empathy. He wasn't able to really connect with a lot of the emotions that many of us take for granted. I kind of doubt that he was capable of love. Obsession, yes, but I'm not entirely sure he was capable of love. So that's pretty much what I have as far as this topic of understanding Ted Bundy goes. And now I'm going to transition over to what kinds of lessons we can learn from him and from his trial and the results of that. So, yes. I think the first thing that I want to discuss in regards to lessons that we can learn from Ted Bundy and his trial is that we should probably reevaluate the death penalty entirely. I know that in the case of Ted Bundy, it makes absolute sense that people are going to want him to be killed. They want revenge to a certain degree for the loss of their loved ones, and the anger and hurt and fear that they feel towards him leads them down the path of, this is the best solution, we should just get rid of him, and so on and so forth. But I think the judge of his trial actually said it right. Ted Bundy and all of the women he killed, all of their lives had great potential, and any of them dying was a loss, really. It was a loss to all of us because we lost out on the potential of these people. Now, of course, Ted was to blame for the loss of much potential in the form of young women and what they could do, but killing him was also a loss. And if you're somebody who suffered by his hand, I can totally see how you would not agree with me here. I can totally understand not understanding what I'm saying, and I can totally get why you would disagree. But from my perspective, any loss of life is a loss of potential, and anytime you kill and cause death unnaturally, you're eliminating a potential development or a potential growth within society as a whole. And that's sad. Understandable, yes, but it's sad. So, I don't agree with the death penalty. That's kind of evident in my discussion here. And yes, that has a lot to do with the potential that's lost, but there's also this aspect of, I believe violence breeds violence. This is the objection I have to war, for example, where one country attacks another, and then that country retaliates because of the first attack, and then, the first country is now angry that they got attacked, so then they come back again. And that might be a little broad, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about. This revenge thing, avenging loss and whatnot, is shockingly common. Romeo and Juliet, prime example of this. You have two warring families, and they attack each other regularly. This family kills a member of this family, then this family goes, we need revenge for this death, and so they kill a member of this family, and then so on and so forth. And we all know that if this continues on, the only thing that can happen, assuming that the battles happen often enough, is that only one person will remain in the end, and behind them will be a trail of blood and dead bodies. So this whole concept of we can resolve things through violence, we can resolve things through death, is ridiculous. I don't know who exactly cared about Ted Bundy. I don't know what their emotional attachment to him, but it could be entirely possible that somebody saw what the state did, what we did to Ted, in killing him, and then went on a warpath of their own because they felt like somebody they cared about had been wrongfully executed and that they needed to get revenge. I don't think this has happened, but the potential for it to happen is there, and who knows what some people might have thought about this. I mean, Ted did have a child through a woman who believed he was innocent the whole time, so I mean, what was that child raised like? What was the psychology and the belief structure that it was raised with? What were the emotions he or she was taught to hold on to? I mean, it's entirely possible that through killing Ted Bundy, his child could potentially become a serial killer as well, merely because Ted Bundy was killed. So this whole concept of killing in order to fix deaths, or killing in order to find resolution from killing, just seems counterintuitive to me. You know, it doesn't make sense to answer violence with violence, because the only thing you create is more violence. And that actually kind of leads to my next point about the death penalty, which is true healing can only really come through rehabilitation. It can only really come through forgiveness, and it can only really come through understanding. Now, you can get past an event like this. You know, for example, when I lost my sister when I was 7, there weren't really answers I could get from her. You know, there wasn't really a informational resolution to that. It was just, she died, you know, she died of a brain tumor, and, you know, there was nothing you could really do about it. So you can get past things when you don't have answers. But in regard to, say, somebody killing your daughter, the need for understanding and figuring out why that person chose her, why she had to die, why he felt that was necessary, and what exactly was going on in his brain, these are questions that I'd say pretty much all the parents of those girls who were killed probably were thinking. And when Ted was killed, they might have felt relief, they might have even felt joy or a sense of justice, but the healing process for them probably became significantly longer, because they could no longer get the answers that they wanted. You know, so many people tried to get Ted to open up about his crimes, and it wasn't until like days before his execution that he actually started to talk, and the amount of information he could convey in that time was very limited. So my guess is a lot of these families are going to be left without answers, and if they can't move past that, they're going to have these answers for the rest of their lives, and that's really unfortunate. So if we really want healing to occur, we actually have to rehabilitate people who commit crimes so that they can therefore start to feel remorse and start to make up for the crimes that they committed. I can totally understand why somebody would not want to forgive Ted Bundy. I am not entirely sure our society will ever forgive him, but I also know that holding on to anger and hate can only lead you down the same path that he followed. So forgiveness is vital, and forgiveness is much easier to do when you understand why that person did what they did. So the death penalty doesn't help in that regard either, because now you can't get answers, you can't see the rehabilitation, you can't have that person earn your forgiveness. You know, you can't give your forgiveness necessarily willingly and look in his eyes. I mean, there are so many aspects of this that could be so much better if he had lived and we were able to rehabilitate him. That being said, rehabilitation is not something that we are fantastic at as a society. I know that Teal Swan is interested in kind of reforming the way that we treat criminals in the justice system and how we go about processing their rehabilitation and whatnot. And I think that is a great thing. The need for understanding is probably the number one issue here, and I think Teal Swan is similar to me in that she likes to, or feels compelled to kind of delve into the psyche of these individuals and come at it from a perspective of, I understand why you did what you did, but this is better for you, you know, let's see if we can move you in this direction kind of thing. Helping them see that there is a better path to follow and that it will benefit them in the long run and help all the people around them as well. And that kind of leads to the second reason, or the second lesson that we can learn from Ted Bundy, which is emotional control. And emotional development is extremely important. Ted Bundy quite evidently was overwhelmed by his negative emotions. He fought against aspects of himself, and he lost, really. I mean, he was completely overwhelmed by what he kind of referred to as a dark entity that overcame him and caused him to do all these crimes. But the only reason that was possible was because he refused to look at parts of himself and understand why they were there and what they were there to accomplish. Emotional control is not something that is necessarily easy for all of us to do. I know that I struggle with maintaining a positive attitude at times, and anger and hate and fear and all these things will always be emotions that I feel at certain points or another. The challenge here is you have to kind of break apart your habits. You have to reevaluate why it is you feel what you feel. You have to break down your belief structures so that you can potentially restructure them, so that you can start from a fresh slate and really start to look at what things will benefit you, what things will help you grow, become a better person, and what things will make society better as a whole. So this is not an easy path, and I am asking people to take a lot of responsibility on themselves. Thankfully, the rewards for doing this are fantastic, but you won't know that until you actually start down this road. But Ted Bundy really does exemplify the reasons why it is so important that we actually start looking at our emotional states and evaluating why it is we feel what we feel, and what is exactly causing those emotions. And the reason it's important is so that we don't end up like Ted Bundy. Now, a lot of people, one of the main examples in the Ted Bundy Tapes documentary series that I believe really shows you why it's so important to start taking control of your emotional state and, altering your behavior so that you maintain a positive attitude, was the concepts that a lot of people stated, which is, Ted Bundy is this monster, and, clearly he was inhuman, and I could never do something like that. To me, whenever somebody says, I'm a good person, I could never do that, that's a big red flag. And the reason it's a red flag is because humans are really good at justifying their behaviors. We're really good at looking at the things that we do and saying, oh, but they deserved it. They earned it. That wasn't wrong. I might not have handled it well, but they deserved that, whatever they got, So we're really good at justifying our behaviors. So when people say, hey, I could never do that, I'm a good person, I could never be evil, that is a scary thing to hear. Because that means that if they do end up doing something heinous or horrible or frightening, terrifying, and whatnot, they will find a way to justify it. I think that both Ted Bundy and Hitler believed that they were good people. I think that's the reason that Ted Bundy continued to claim he was innocent right up until the last few days before his execution. I'm sure a lot of people were like, oh, he just did that so he could try to escape his punishment altogether. And I'm like, well, there might be some truth to that, but my guess is he was just completely unable to face the horrors that he'd actually done. He wasn't able to look at himself and his actions and face that being. He wasn't able to look at that monster inside and be like, oh my gosh, I see you, I understand you. He was not willing to accept that part of himself. And he continued to push against that aspect for so long that it caused him to do so many things, and it became harder and harder and harder to face the monster inside him. This is why I describe this concept of facing the monster within as being so important. We all have infinite potential to go either direction. You know, you could be the next Ted Bundy or the next Hitler, but you could also be the next Buddha or the next Jesus. And I don't mean this to be blasphemous in any way, but, you know, Ted Bundy and Hitler are examples of the extreme negative, and Jesus and Buddha are examples of the extreme positive. We all have the potential to reach either sides of this spectrum, and it all comes down to our emotional focus and our emotional patterns. So when somebody says, hey, I am a good person, I could never do that, they're actually cutting the scale in half, and they're saying, I could only fall on this side of the scale, which means anytime they fall on this side of the scale, they're going to say, well, no, I was doing it because of this reason on this side. You know, it might be an action that's on this side, but it was justified. There was a good reason I was here and did this. And I think Hitler is a good example of this, in that he believed he was building a better society. He believed that he was actually creating something good and beautiful and wonderful. He did it in the worst possible way, but he thought he was doing something good. He justified to himself his actions and went, it's necessary, you know, in order to create this positive change, I have to do this stuff, you know, it's justified. It's worth it. So Hitler and Ted Bundy are actually two aspects of the same overarching mentality. Both men believed themselves to be good people. One rejected and denied his reactions. This was Ted Bundy, as he continued to proclaim his innocence. And the other one justified his behavior by saying, hey, I'm doing this for the betterment of all. So both of these people thought they fell on the side of good. Both these people believed that they couldn't do terrible things, and when they discovered the monster within, when at long last the monster came out, one denied its existence and said, well, that wasn't me, the devil made me do it, essentially, and the other one said, well, I'm doing it for a good reason, so obviously it can't be wrong, and therefore maintained his status as a good person. We all do this. And I think that's the reason why this statement, doing the wrong thing for the right reason is still the wrong thing, exists. Don't do the wrong thing. Even if you think it's justified, it is not okay to do the wrong thing. You know, don't cheat on a test, even though you think you can cure cancer. You still should pass your medical exams without cheating. You know, it's not okay for you to cheat on that test just because you think you can cure cancer. You know, so the wrong thing done for the right reason is still the wrong thing. So don't do it. And honestly, this is probably the main lesson that I get from this Ted Bundy case. Most of the people who were standing outside the prison and cheering when Ted Bundy died, you know, they were justifying their emotional reaction, their sense of relief, by saying, well, he deserved it, he earned it, you know, he got what he deserved, kind of thing. But really, they very well could have been feeling the exact kind of relief that Ted Bundy got through killing. They just did it in a societally acceptable way. I know that I've heard a couple stories of soldiers going into the military so that they can kill people. And, you know, that's the reason that they join. And I'm like, that's not good. You know, that person probably needs some therapy. You know, they really need some help with that mentality, because the strong desire to kill indicates some issue going on inside their heads. You know, it's not normal to kill. Really, it's not. Our natural state is well-being. Our natural state is one of unity and connection. So whenever we are unhealthy, or whenever we are disconnected, violent, or tend towards destruction, that means there's something up. You know, we're not living our true authentic selves. We are being subject to our emotional states, our negative emotions in particular. and the influence that they have on us. So for all the people who suffered at Ted Bundy's hand, you know, I get that it was a terrible thing, it was a terrible loss, and you were completely justified in whatever feelings you were having. But in my eyes, that doesn't really change the necessity for you to take responsibility for your own life, and to recognize the monster within yourself as well. It is potentially extremely dangerous for us to deny the monster within, for us to say, I could never do this. And for those of you willing to actually start going down this path and starting to explore the depths of your own psyche and, you know, what kinds of things cause you to react in the ways that you do, you are actually preventing yourself from becoming the next Ted Bundy or the next Hitler, because you now recognize that that is a possibility and therefore can actively work to prevent such an occurrence from happening. Whereas people who are unwilling to do this work and follow this path won't be able to recognize when the monster within rears its head. So I highly encourage people to start doing this internal work, to start looking at the monster within, to face the darkness and see what it's trying to teach you. The darkness is not there because you're evil or because there's innate bad in all of us. It is only there to teach you and to help you grow. So instead of denying this aspect of yourself, really start to look at it and figure out what that lesson is. And once you start doing that, you can really start to become the kind of person that you want to be. You can really start to help the world around you, and you can help people grow and become better, more productive members of society as well. So that's everything that I have to say in this video. I know it's really long, but I do think that this is a valuable discussion to have. I'm sorry if any of you guys feel hurt or judged. That is not my intention. I merely want to help you understand and potentially start learning about yourself and recognizing the necessity for some personal work. If you are feeling upset, or if you are feeling attacked or judged or anything like that, I encourage you to take some time to yourself. Breathe, meditate, and start to look inside at what exactly upset you and why, and then come back after you've done that work and explain it to me gently, because I really don't need to deal with the negative aspects myself. If there is something that I've said that you believe was said badly and could be improved upon, feel free to leave those in the comments as well. I'm not a perfect person, and learning to communicate better is certainly part of the process of my development. If you have any questions, comments, ideas for new videos, concepts that you wish I discussed in this one, feel free to leave those in the comments as well. And if you liked this video, if you felt like you learned something from it, or if it got you thinking or reevaluating your life, I encourage you to click on that like button, subscribe to the channel and the notification bell, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something. I hope you grew. And I hope that you were able to find some new understandings. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.